benefits of me losing my voice means I'm not going to hog all the interview time, and you guys will be able to ask questions. But I did want to start just kind of, one of the things that when you kind of look at your filmography is you got to work with some of the most amazing directors. Soderbergh, Spielberg, Landis, I mean, you worked with so many people. Just as an actress, what is it that you look at when you look at a project as a director, high on the list, or is it more the script? I would assume director, since you've worked with so many damn
I think it's both. I mean, the director means a lot, in terms of, because you read the script and you respond to the script, and then you really, want to go back and look at the director's work. And in many cases, a lot of the directors I've gotten to work with, they have such an incredible body of work. So you wouldn't even think for a second about, not wanting to have the chance to work with them. So, yeah, but it's, it is very important. I've also worked with a lot of young directors who are doing their first films, and sometimes in that case, you just, you have to just go with the script, and you just leap in and take a chance, and you base that on a, conversation that you have, or somehow just having a good feeling about the project.
Well, when you did Animal House, that was one of Landis's early movies, right? I think he
It was. He'd done, I think, Kentucky Fried Movie.
Yeah, and she did Schlock.
And Schlock, Schlock I don't think I'd seen. I'd seen Kentucky Fried Movie, but they didn't really tell me that much about him as a director.
He just said that you would get to share a scene with Donald Sutherland's bare butt, and you said
Well, there's a great story about Donald Sutherland's bare butt, but...
I'm very glad you know
it wasn't in the script.
Was it in rehearsal?
You want to hear the story?
I do want to hear the story.
Okay, it's actually a very, very sweet story, because John Landis, the day that we were going to shoot the scene where Peter Riggert comes and finds me with Donald Sutherland, I had read the script, obviously, and in the scene, it was never mentioned that Katy was, it was just, he walked in, he saw me. So the morning we were going to shoot the scene, John Landis said to me, okay, so this is what we're going to do. He had me in it, the costume was like this long blue t-shirt, and he said, so as the scene starts, we're going to start it on your naked butt, and you're going to be pulling the t-shirt. And I was like, wait a minute. What do you mean? No, we're not starting it on the naked butt. And he said, yeah, that's what I want to do. And I said, no. That was not in the script, and there's going to be no naked butt here. And he's like, yeah, that's what we want to do. That's how we want to shoot it. And I'm like, no. And I'm like digging in my heels, and he's digging in his heels. And I look over, and Donald Sutherland is standing there looking very amused. And he came over and he said, okay, look, I have a solution to this problem. If she has to show her naked butt in the scene, I'll show my naked butt in the scene. And John Landis says, what do you mean? And he said, I don't know, how would you do that? And Donald Sutherland said, just a minute, I'll show you. He walked off the set, and he took off his pants, and he came back on, and one of his costume pieces was this long sweater that he had on. And to just, cover the essentials, he sort of pushed his hands down into the pockets and made the sweater like extra long. And then he walked into the kitchen and he said, hey, Katy, and he lifted up his arms, and the sweater went flying up. And John and I started laughing, and I thought, if Donald Sutherland will do this to make me feel more comfortable in the scene, all right, okay, I will, go with this. It was like incredibly kind of me.
See, this is already the best Q&A you guys have seen today. I want to, of course, there's many indies in the audience. I want to get to Marion, but right before that, I want to bring up another favorite movie of mine that you're in called Scrooged.
Yeah.
Apologies for the teenagers. You have a really good Donald Sutherland story. I'm sure you must have one or two about Bill.
Well, let's see. He was...
But stories are optional. chair, don't worry about Sweet.
He was very, very fun and challenging to work with because mostly, he likes to improvise. So, and I like to improvise as well, but he was constantly sort of deciding at the last minute that he didn't like the way a scene was written. So the day would always start off where we'd be in the makeup trailer at like 6 in the morning, and he'd suddenly decide that he didn't want to say any of the lines that were written. And of course, I had, or the other actor he was working with, we'd been up the night before, like trying to learn the lines, and all of a sudden he would say, well, I don't like the way this is written. Word would get out, like suddenly there would be this little panic in the trailer, and all of a sudden like one of the ADs would go sneaking off and tell the director, Bill's in the trailer, Bill doesn't want to say any of the lines, what are we going to do? And in would come Richard Donner, who was directing the film, and we'd start to try to figure out what we were going to do, but very often, the whole scene would be abandoned, and we would just start improvising and reworking the scene, and then sometimes the writers would be called, and they'd sort of show up in their pajamas. They'd come running from their apartments to the set, and they'd show up and they'd be trying to kind of, write as we were going, and it was very challenging in many, many ways, because I had to stay so on my toes to work with him. And I would often, just go home at night. We shot a lot of the beginning part of it in New York City in the middle of the winter, and I'd just go home at night and I'd just be like, I'd sort of lie in the hot bath going, oh my God, I got through this day. But we had an awful lot of fun doing it. It was a new challenge for me, yeah.
Well, I think Claire is one of the sweetest movie characters ever, and I think that she brought something to that Christmas Carol story that other adaptations didn't have, that really kind of humanized the Scrooge.
Yeah. They actually gave, it was a really lovely role, that role of Claire, yeah.
I love it, but I also love a role that you did, and you've repeated it now once with Kingdom of Crystal Skull, but let's talk a little bit about Marion Ravenwood. I think it's time.
Yeah.
Even at a young age when I watched that film, I recognized that Marion was a different kind of character. Especially, it became even more unique when I grew up and started seeing the original serials that were the inspiration for Raiders of the Lost Ark. In those serials, the female lead was always just a damsel in distress, always. But Marion Ravenwood is not.
Yeah.
So I guess what I want to start with is asking about your first read of that script. And was Marion that we know on the screen, on the page, or was that something that was kind of developed because she became a very strong character?
I think it was a little bit of both. I was given, so Steven Spielberg had seen me in Animal House, and he was good friends with John Landis, and then he'd also seen a film I did that Rob Cohen directed, who was a good friend of Spielberg's at the time, and it was called A Small Circle of Friends, and it was shot at Harvard during the set in the 60s, and I played a very, strong character in it. So when he was going to cast Raiders of the Lost Ark, he asked to meet me when he was in New York, and I was only allowed to read the scene in the bar, which is such a fantastic scene. And so I was given that scene, and we just met and talked, and I didn't audition, but later he wanted me to fly to Los Angeles and audition, and they did actual screen tests, which aren't done that much anymore, but this was going to be an actual screen test, and I flew with an actor named John Shea. I don't know if you guys, he's a wonderful actor. He was in a film with Sissy Spacek called Missing. Anyway, he was you probably all know the story that Tom Selleck was cast to be Indiana Jones. And then Tom Selleck had done the pilot for Magnum P.I., and they wouldn't let him out of the contract that he'd signed, and it got picked up, and suddenly they didn't have an Indiana Jones. So by the time I got involved, I was auditioning with a lot of different people. I auditioned with Tim Matheson from Animal House, and John Shea. I think Jeff Bridges, I didn't audition with Jeff, but I know he was a candidate. There were a lot of different actors that they were interested in for Indiana Jones at the time. But I read the scene and fell completely in love with the character. The scene in the bar, because I thought, what an amazing introduction to a character. We meet her, she's drinking this big mountain man under the table, knocking back shots of whiskey, and then Indiana Jones comes in, and the first thing she does is sock him in the face, and I just thought, yes, I like this girl. So I really, really wanted the part based on having only really read that one scene, and that's the scene that I also then auditioned with.
I used to go around the house screaming "Biscotti," and I had no idea what it meant. And that's what she did before she made that dude fall over. So.
I think it means enough.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
so. If I remember, or get out,
Yeah.
get out or something.
All right.
Get out.
I want to just run real quickly through a couple of key scenes that are always my favorite, some of my favorite scenes in the movie with you, and then I want to open it up to the audience. So if you guys want to ask questions, look for the microphones. I think that they're one there, one there. I was in one panel today. The volunteers know more than I do. All right, so the bar scene we've covered. Hitting Indy with a mirror. The mirror scene.
I think that was in the script. I think that we just, we ended up in that little room where we were shooting it, and that mirror was there, and it was just the kind of mirror that flipped around. And I think it was just an idea Spielberg had on the day, where he was just like, oh, this is great, flip the mirror around and knock him in the face with it. So,
did you really clock him? It looks like you really clocked him.
I clocked him when I punched him a couple of times. No, I don't think so. I think that would have really hurt. No, I think we were able to work it out so that I didn't really hit him.
Yeah. Not to put the film critic hat on too much, but that scene is amazing because it's so funny and it's also the sweetest scene between you two.
Yeah.
And it's like the breath in between all the action too. So it's a really beautiful scene, and you guys knock it out of the park. The other scene that's really amazing, and I think that is probably my favorite work of yours in the entire movie, is the drinking scene with Paul Friedman.
It's one of my favorite. I'll tell you the story about that is that scene didn't exist in the script, and the way it was set up in the script was the dress, this white dress, was brought in and shown to my character, and for some reason that I couldn't understand, Marion just is eager to put on this dress, and seems to be eager to, I think it was, the way it was originally written is that it almost becomes a seduction between Belloc and Marion. And I read it and I thought, this doesn't really work. I felt like it didn't really respect the character and respect because I was really very much believing that Marion was deeply in love with Indy. And that was sort of what I was going on. And when I got to that scene, it was just kept bothering me and kept bothering me. And I said to Stephen, we can't believe that she's really willing to be seduced by or going to participate in this seduction, and then it gets interrupted by Ronnie Lacey's character when he comes in with the coat hanger. Because it'll kind of ruin it between Indy and Marion if that happens. So I said, we have to find a reason why she puts on the dress and what she's about to do. And I thought if we make up this event where she puts on the dress in order to hide the knife, in order to get the knife, to try to escape. And Stephen said, well, you guys work something out and show it to me, and if I like it, we'll do it differently. So Paul and I would sneak off at lunchtime and go over to the set where the tent was set up, and we started doing all these little improvisations, and we came up with this idea that the only reason I put on the dress is to hide the knife, and we showed it to Stephen, and he loved it. So that was how the whole thing progressed, and it ended up being a very special scene, I think, because it starts out with you thinking I'm faking getting drunk, and then I actually really, really end up quite plastered in the scene.
Well, once again, Marion's proactive. She's not waiting to be rescued by Indy. She's making her own fate. I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah, I felt like a lot of times in the script, sometimes there were these moments where they had almost were turning Marion into a damsel in distress. And every time we came to one of those moments, I would question it and I would say, no, I don't think, she's not that character. I think she would grab something and fight back. I think she would do this. I don't think she... And they, I have to say, it was great because along the way, it was really, it was a very interesting, creative conversation that we got to have. And I think that I got to actually make her a stronger character than she might have been in the original script.
Well, thank you. You helped create one of the best cinema heroines of all time. So, all right, let's open it up to questions.
Well, Ms. Allen, my question to you today is about a scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark. In the scene in which you and Indy had to escape the Well of Souls, did it haunt or disturb you in any way to be covered with a bunch of 3,000-year-old dead mummies in any way?
Well, to tell you the truth, even though that is such a short little sequence in the film, as the film is now, I really remember being stuck in those catacombs for about 8 solid days. Well, that was actually written as a much, much longer sequence than what you see in the film. And it was pretty unbearable shooting it because there were just all these, snakes that were coming in and out of like mouths and eye sockets, all of these skeletons and things, and there were people up above me who were constantly dropping down like this stuff. It's called Fuller's Earth. It's meant to create dust and dirt and stuff in films, and it's horrible. I mean, it was like constantly in my ears and down my throat and my nose and in my eyes, and this went on for day after day after day, and I couldn't wait to be done with this sequence. And fortunately, well, it didn't really matter because I'd already shot all these days and having all this dirt all over me and stuff. But they decided after when they came down to editing it that, at that point you kind of want to get out of the Well of Souls and you want to get us outside because we've kind of been in this pit for a long enough period of time. So it became a very minor sequence in the film, but not so in shooting it.
You have a hell of a scream in that scene, by the way. All right, next question.
Hi, Ms. Allen. I weave as a hobby, and I've always found your recent work with textiles very interesting. And I was wondering, are you still doing that? And if so, since I don't find myself in Massachusetts very often, if you had any of your products here available for purchase.
Oh gosh, no, I don't have anything here, and I am still doing it. I have what she's referring to. Before I became an actor, I actually went to school in New York City at FIT, which is the Fashion Institute of Technology, and studied design, clothing design, and textile design. And it was always something I was very passionate about, particularly working, with fibers and textiles and color and pattern. So when my son got to be a certain age and the traveling became a bit complicated in terms of doing films, I went back to FIT and studied working on these very cool Japanese knitting machines, and I started a little company which I sort of grew, and it built up over the years when my son was in junior high school and high school. And I have a store and I have a design studio in Massachusetts where I also have a home, and I do a line of sweaters and scarves and hats and gloves. And I now that my son is grown up and out in the world on his own, I have less and less time to do it, but I do still do it when I have time in between projects. I'm directing a lot now, so I'm away, more than I was certainly going back a few years. And but whenever I have the time, I still am there, and I still do design things and make things. And I make them myself, which people keep saying, oh no, you couldn't possibly make those things yourself. No, I do. It's like me doing the entire thing. Nobody, I don't even work with anybody. I just do it completely by myself. can't see anybody there.
Hello? Oh, here we go. Hi, I just had two quick questions. One, you talked in an interview some time back about how you grew up in a predominantly female household. Do you think this helped contribute to you play such strong female characters? And do you feel like it's kind of helped contribute to your interest in those kind of characters? And also, I've read that you do a lot of theater work, and I just kind of wondered if you had a particular play that was very dear to you.
Oh gosh. Well, I did grow up in a predominantly female household, but I don't know. I always had a pretty independent spirit, even as like a little kid. So I think, I think I was always drawn to, it's just like, I was always a very adventurous person. Like when I was 22, I took off and went to live in the West Indies by myself, and then I ran into two old friends, and we drove from Mexico City to Lima, Peru, and spent about 8 months like on the road, like out in the middle of like it was amazing, all through Central and South America, and so I've always had that kind of spirit of adventure that I don't really have any explanation for, other than, because even though I grew up in a household with women, neither one of my sisters are like that at all, and my mother is the antithesis of that. So I'm not really sure, where that came from. And I'm forgetting the second half of your question.
Play that means a lot to
Oh, a play. There are so many plays that mean a lot to me. I work both in the theater as an actor, and now I've been directing a lot in the theater for about the last 7-8 years. There's a lot of plays I absolutely love. I've done a couple of productions of a play called Moon Children, which is a fantastic play about the 60s. And I had worked on a play most recently, Extremities, which I was in the 80s, and then I just directed a production of it, and it's an extraordinary play. And what else? I just fell recently in love with a play called The Flick, which I would like to direct, which is an Annie Baker play. The list would go on and on and on. I'm going to direct Frankie and Johnny and the Claire de Lune, which is a Terrence McNally play, and I'm going to do that play probably this coming June. And it's a play I've long loved as well.
Do you do that in your home, or is this New York?
I do it in various places. So I work a lot in New York City at the Cherry Lane Theater, which is one of my favorite theaters on the planet. And in Massachusetts, I live in this area in the Berkshires that's, in the summer, there are 4 really amazing theater festivals there. And I tend to work with, I've worked at one point or another with all 4 of them, but I tend to work as a director of the Berkshire Theater Festival, which is in Stockbridge, Massachusetts.
All right. You're ready for the next one.
All right, do you have any good John Belushi stories from when you did Animal House?
And is that Superman asking the question?
Yes, it is.
All right, but not Belushi as Hulk. I would think. Man, how old is no reference? Sorry.
He was just great when we did Animal House. He was doing double duty because he was shooting Saturday Night Live at the same time. So he would literally fly to us on Sunday after they shot Saturday Night Live, and then he'd work with us on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. He'd leave back on a plane, like he'd take the red eye on Wednesday or something, fly back to rehearse, on Thursday and Friday, and be ready to do Saturday Night Live on Saturday. So, he was really kind of, pushing the envelope in terms of his time and his energy. But he was a doll. I mean, he was a lot of fun. He did, his character, people don't even realize it, but his character hardly speaks in Animal House. It's all physical comedy, and it's all him creating this character out of nothing, because when you read the script, the character of Bluto is it's not really on the page. John really created the whole thing himself. And he's such a joy to watch in that film. That's a film I actually see, you know, at least once a year, and I just always marvel at him. And actually the whole cast. I think that it's an amazing group of actors in that film.
Belushi's like Bugs Bunny in that movie. He's a living Looney Tune. Love it. All right, next question.
Hey, Alan, first off, two quick thank yous, and then my question. Thank you for being here, by the way. We lost some guests along the way. Also, I want to thank you for not only going back and doing Crystal Skull, but also doing the little extra on the Animal House DVD where we saw what happened to the Faber students years later. Because you and Peter Riegert didn't age. You look great on there. It was so much fun to see you.
Oh, we had a lot of fun doing that.
But my question is, what can we do to get you back in front of the camera, and what would you want to do?
Well, I have a film that's coming out. It's going to be at Sundance in January, and then I think it'll go. I think it'll go to maybe the Berlin Film. It's going to go the film festival route, and you know, we'll see what kind of distribution it gets. It's a little independent film. It seems to me these days the films that come my way that interest me the most, they tend to be sort of small, independent films being made for very little money, but the scripts are quite wonderful. And the characters that I get offered in these kind of films are actually quite interesting, challenging, complex characters. So I tend to gravitate in that direction, and sometimes the downside to doing that is sometimes the films, because they don't have distribution already, you know, even if I did a film that way about 4 years ago, which I think is a wonderful film. It's called White Irish Drinkers. But it got distribution, but it didn't get a lot of money behind its distribution. Stephen Lang is in it with me, and it kind of, you know, came and went, and very few people saw it. And this film that I just finished could have a similar fate, because these films, they don't have a lot of, you know, money behind them, money for the distribution, money for the advertising and stuff. But on the other hand, the kind of roles that I get offered in sort of the big commercial splashy films have not interested me very much. So I've tended to, you know, back away from them and put my time more into directing in the theater and doing things that I feel really passionate about. So I don't know. You know, I'm waiting to see if we're going to shoot another Indiana Jones film, and that I would wholly embrace. And
I think one or two people here might want to see that too. I'm going to say they're making a big deal out of Harrison going back to Star Wars.
Yeah.
And apparently the scuttlebutt is that he only agreed to do that if they would seriously come up with a new Indy movie for him.
I hadn't heard that, but that's,
Yeah.
I like the sound of that.
That's the internet rumors with the Z. All right, so who's the next guy here? Or girl.
Hello, my name is Dominic, and I'm wondering how did you feel while working with Harrison Ford?
The first time or the second time or both? Both together. You know, the first time that we worked together, it was like a little process of trying to get to know him, because he's you know, he stayed very much to himself in a way when we were working on the first film. And I felt kind of throughout the process like I was just barely getting to know him as we worked. And when we came around to do the second film, it was like old home week or something. I mean, we just, from the moment that we sort of showed up to do like the early little screen tests and stuff, we were just sort of like old friends, and that was lovely. And I had seen him a number of times in between. We had done a couple of little, you know, things together, promotional things, or just we'd kind of run into each other here and there. And I am a professor in the theater department of a college called Bard College. And his daughter, for a period of time, was a student of mine, which was a kind of great little collision. And he actually would sometimes fly into this little town of Great Barrington to visit her, so I would get to see him there. But no, we have, we've developed a really, really wonderful friendship and working relationship now, but it's taken it took a number of years, for that to happen, and now our characters are like married. We have a love child.
I was in Hall H at San Diego Comic-Con whenever they revealed you for the first time, if you remember that.
I do. It was
well, I think the audience was more excited to see Marion back than Indy.
They tortured me enormously because I got a phone call. So we started shoot that film in, I think, June of, maybe it was 2007. But I got a phone call in January of 2007 from Steven saying, we're going to do this, we have the script, there's a role that we've written in it for you, and I read it, and I was so touched that they had made my character, that we had this child together, and that we ended up getting married in the script, and I was like, this is so fantastic. And then Steven said to me, of course, you can't tell anybody you're in this. And I said, well, I have to tell my son. I have to tell some people, if I'm going to leave to California for 4 months, I've got to let a few people know. And he's like, well, only the most essential people can know. Can't tell anybody. So time went by, 5 months went by, and I ended up in Los Angeles in June to start shooting the film, and he was still, you can't tell anybody. This is like getting impossible, because I would run into people who, they're like, oh, what are you doing in Los Angeles? And I'm like, having to very quickly try to make up some intricate reason.
Wasn't much, he's an Alberta.
So finally, I think it was well into July. When is Comic-Con? July. Whenever it was, he finally said to me, we're going to announce this at Comic-Con. I was like, oh, thank God. I thought he had some sort of idea that he was going to be able to keep it a complete secret that I was in the film, all through the shooting of it. So much so that when we started to shoot, he had me I had to wear a coat with a hood and stuff to go from my trailer. He didn't want, it was ridiculous.
Sorry, it's jerks like me that in the site that I write for is really made you go through all that, I apologize.
So, hey, I was wondering, answering from more of an internal and personal perspective, as well as considering work in theater. Did tested. We're almost done with the question. Did working with Steven Spielberg affect you or make you feel any differently? Did working with him any different than working with other directors that you work with? I mean, what stood out with him as opposed to working with other directors, if there was anything?
I think when I did Raiders of the Lost Ark, I was a fairly young actor in the sense I had done 3 films. For the most part, they'd all been sort of small films in the sense that they were just, they were shot on location. They were mostly about relationships between characters and stuff. And it was just such a huge project. I was in London, we were at Elstree Studios and these huge, amazing sets that were being built. And it was a new experience on so many different levels. And the process of being an actor in a film like that was so new to me. And I was just like, whoa, okay, it's like the seat of the pants experience. And I think, working with Steven, we had to kind of figure out how to work together because I was kind of coming out of the theater and coming out of films where, I had been more, I felt somehow in control of what I was doing. And now suddenly I was a part of this huge film. And Steven was, I think, very much used to kind of being in control. And so, you know, in the beginning, it was always just trying to figure out, of course, he knew so much more about it than I did, so I had to kind of really trust him in many ways, and I think he had to learn to let go and kind of trust me as well, that I was going to, you know how. I know in the beginning, you know, we had some things where, you know, he thought somehow I was like too nice a person to play this character or something. You know, it's like he was going to have to like toughen me up, you know, or something. Like he wanted me to be tougher, and I kept saying, no, Stephen, that's just like acting. Like who I am as a person and what I can bring to the character are like two different things. Like I would probably never punch somebody in the jaw, but as the character, I have absolutely no problem. And you know, I would probably never like knock back one shot or whiskey after the other, waiting for somebody to pass out on the other side of the table. But as the character, it's like a piece of cake. So, you know, we had to kind of find our way. But he had a great impact on me as a director. You know, even when I wasn't in scenes, I would be on the set as much as I could to watch him work and to watch him with the actors. And you know, he's a marvel. I mean, he knows very clearly, you know, what he wants, and he knows very clearly how he wants to shoot something. And yet, at the same time, he's very open to doing things like right off the cuff. And so, you know, there's a certain element of the film that is invented as you go, and a certain element of the film that is so carefully thought out and worked out before. And it was, you know, for me, it was one of those extraordinary experiences. I mean, there have been those directors that have had, like Paul Newman had an incredible effect on me when I worked with him. You know, he really kind of changed the way I thought about myself as an actor. I worked with Arthur Penn in a play that I worked on for about 1.5 years. We were at 4 different theaters, and he created an incredible impression on me as a director. So there are those directors who just, you know, everything shifts and changes when you work with them. You suddenly become you know, a different and hopefully, you know, better actor by having had that experience.
Hi. So I happen to be someone who remembers actors and actresses as their character from the movie that had the largest impact on my life, not necessarily their largest role. So I've always thought of you as Katy from Animal House. My question is, when you're out and about in public, which role are you most frequently recognized as, and do people come up and talk to you about it?
They do, and I think it depends, you know, it depends on, you know, people have certain identifications with different characters. Like there are some people who are absolutely huge Starman fans, for instance, and it's like I get a lot of I get a lot of people kind of come and talk to me about Starman. Animal House too, you know, I mean, it was my very first film, and you know, I'm just a part of that ensemble, but somehow that character sort of left an impression. I always call Katy's like the voice of reason, you know, in the world gone mad. And I really related to Katy very much when I first read the script. I thought, yeah, you know, grow up, you guys. You know, I think obviously Marion Ravenwood is probably the most, you know, those films are the most, well, I mean, I've been in places like, you know, in the mountains in Argentina, kind of, you know, and people have come up to me and said, oh my God, Marion Ravenwood. I mean, it's really quite extraordinary
That's
how...
where you would expect to find Marion Ravenwood.
I guess. I think I was in Mumbai in India. You know, one day I was having love. I did a little travel through India, and you know, it's like it's sort of the last thing that you expect. You know, you kind of get way away in the world, and you don't realize that these films are films that have been seen all over the world, which is kind of amazing. It's an amazing thing. to be that connected in a way to the rest of the world through a film.
All right, are we over here?
Hello?
Hello.
What was your most memorable moment when filming Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Besides all the skeletons.
Snakes.
Well, he said snakes. Fortunately for me, I don't have irrational fear of snakes. And I have to count myself lucky because when you read a script, you're reading it, you kind of think, oh, snakes, you don't really imagine, or at least I didn't imagine when I read the screenplay, that I would find myself several months later in a room with 6,000 snakes. It just didn't really cross my mind. I don't know why, it just didn't. So, originally, Steven Spielberg had created this little thing, the special effects. Special effects were pretty, non-existent back then. But we had this thing where these snakes, these electronic snakes, were on this grid along the bottom of the Well of Souls. And they hooked this whole thing up, and the snakes were meant to kind of move like this. And the first day we were there, they were doing some camera tests, and they said, this looks terrible. This will never work. And they took what was probably weeks worth of work, it could have been months worth of work. They had to rip it all up off the floor, and they put out this major emergency call for snakes. And they wanted 6,000 snakes, and the snakes started pouring into Elstree Studio. And they would set them. They were in these big bins. They were all very well taken care of. There were animal cruelty people everywhere watching them. But they had all these snakes in these big bins around the whole Well of Souls set. Because snakes don't like the lights. The minute that the lights would come on the set, the snakes would want to crawl away and go someplace kind of cool and dark. So they would have to wait until they brought us onto the set. And of course, I was barefoot, like nothing on my legs, especially after, he rips the dress, and then I'm just bare-legged and barefoot. And they would just literally almost pour these snakes on me. And, had I been somebody who was frightened of snakes, it would have been a disaster. But fortunately, I wasn't really that nervous about them, except there were pythons, and people were being bitten by the pythons on the set from time to time, and it's a nasty bite. So if I had a python that was coming towards me, I would just exit stage right. And
Suddenly 5 feet further away.
but I think those were probably some of my more memorable moments, was just having people pour bins of snakes on my feet and down my legs. I mean, it's hard to actually describe. And then, of course, we had not only that, but we had fire in there, and it turns out after they had made about 12 or 14 of the white dress that I wear, that the fabric was such that they suddenly realized it couldn't be fire retardant without it dissolving. So, and it turned out it was also kind of highly flammable. So they had people standing kind of with fire extinguishers and wet blankets and stuff on either side of the camera frame in case I went up. And sometimes there would also be cobras on the set that were in a special box, and they were treated there was a special cobra handler and stuff. But if the cobras got away from the handler, so there was an ambulance on the set with detox and stuff. And so those days were a little stressful. They stand out in my memory.
Nice. I think you had time to last you here.
My favorite movie that you were in was Starman. I love that movie. What was it like working on that movie and working with Jeff Bridges?
Well, he is one of my all-time favorite people, I have to say. He is just a doll, and he's funny, he's filled with creativity. He and I did all kinds of wonderful things together while we were shooting the film. We started working on like a record album that we were going to do together. He and I we began this thing where we started taking pictures of the crew as they were making the film, and at the end of the film together we put all of our pictures together, and we had a little book printed of the making of the film, and then he continued this tradition like with through all of his films. And I just had a total blast working with him. He's a great guy, and it was such a sweet story. And I actually just saw him not long ago because he's been on tour with his band, the Abiders. Did anybody see it? I heard they were here in Dallas, but I saw them in New York. They're fantastic if you get a chance to see them. But it was really, it's a road movie, and he spent an enormous amount of time in a car. It's hard to act in a car. You're just kind of sitting there the whole time. But John Carpenter, bless his heart, he found like so many angles to shoot us from in that car, like every which way. But it's amazing how much of that film we're just like in a car, sitting in a car together. But I loved doing it. I had a great time.
And I think this is the last question, so hopefully it's good.
Well, I hope it would. I would start out by saying, and I'm sure everybody in the room would join me in thanking you again for being so gracious to be here and for being part of this event. This lady stole my thunder just a little bit because I was going to ask you about Starman 2. I've got a good follow-up to what she asked, and that is, with all the excitement, I know we all have excitement about the idea of another Indiana Jones film. I, too, loved Starman. It touched me in a profound way. It was wonderful acting. As I recall, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, wasn't Jeff Bridges nominated for an Oscar for that?
He was, yeah.
So, is there any chance, you were pregnant at the end of
I
it with
know.
a star child, could we have another Starman follow-up?
Jeff and I would really, really like to do that, and we talk about it, pretty much every time we see each other.
Please talk to him again.
It's really not up to us. The film, it's a little bit complicated, and one of the things that complicated it is after the film came out, I don't know if you remember this, they did a short-lived television series called Starman, and I'm not going to remember who was in it right now.
Robert Hayes.
Yes, Robert Hayes, that's right. And the fact that it was done on television, and there's something about the writers who worked on the script and the writers who ended up getting credit for the script, and the studio that originally produced it, and it's a complicated thing. And I actually have a great idea for the sequel, and I've talked to people a number of times, and I would love to see that happen. Everybody wants to. People come up to me quite often, and they go, "I want to know who that child is. Who does that child become?" And I want to know what in that child, that special child, and it's a wonderful idea to do it. And Jeff and I would love to see it happen, and it's every time we've really kind of pushed close to it, there gets to be a bit of resistance, and it just has to do with the complexity of who actually owns the rights to Starman, and whether or not you could do a sequel without it involving a lot of people. I haven't given up, and he hasn't given up either. We still talk about it, but I don't know for sure if it will happen. Sadly, yeah.
Well, thank you all for coming out.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I'll be here till 7 tonight, and I'll be here all day tomorrow.
Yeah, I recommend if you haven't gotten a chance to meet this lady, it's quite a pleasure.
Great, thank you so much.